Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, encryption might be less secure than originally thought, EasyDNS suffers an attack, and then comes up with a clever solution, a big story for Windows users, a batch of your questions, our answers, and much, much more on this week's episode of TechSNAP. Everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP. This is episode 123 of Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly systems network and administration podcast. We stream this episode live on August 15th, 2013. This episode is brought to you by our two fine sponsors, GoDaddy.com and UnitySync by Directory Wizards. I'll tell you more about both of those as the show goes on. And the live stream is powered by the incredible content distribution network, ScaleEngine.com. Go over to ScaleEngine.com and check them out. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week is our host, the admin, the tech, and the teacher, Mr. Alan Jude. Hey there, Alan.
Hey, Chris, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.
Hey, man, welcome back. How was the trip?
Yes. Much fun.
Yeah.
Much tired.
Yeah, you and I are both like... So last week, we did two episodes in a row. So the episode that came out last week was after recording 2 weeks, and I think...
Yeah, 2 weeks ago, we did two episodes in a row, so that last week when I wasn't here, there would be an episode.
Right,
so.
And I think by the end of last week's episode, you and I are both kind of getting pretty tired, and now we're tired again. Completely different reasons. My new baby daughter has just decided that she doesn't like to sleep Wednesday nights. That's just, she's not her night.
Every other night's okay, just Wednesday.
Pretty much. Wednesday's like
weird.
the battle night. That's the battle night. Mm-hmm. But you just got back from the Vegas Trek convention. And, like, you've only been back for, like, 2 days, right? Or a day?
I got back Monday night, yes.
Okay. Well, can I show this great picture that you sent me? You mind?
Sure. Yeah.
All right, here is Alan. Ladies and gentlemen, I present you Alan sitting in the captain's chair, where, honestly, he was born to sit. Look at that. You look like a man meant to sit in that chair.
Yep.
Give him the engage. So, audio listeners, Alan is actually in full Starfleet uniform in this picture as well.
Yes.
That's awesome. And you said there's more, too, right?
Yeah, there's much more pictures. They're just not back from the photographer yet.
Did they have like other sets, or was it only TNG?
Just the TNG one. It's,
that's all right. If you're gonna go,
it's a nonprofit that's rebuilding the set for a museum.
Oh, that's really cool. Good for them.
Yes.
That sounds
there's
like a museum
also
I
a bunch of pictures of various Star Trek celebrities sitting on the bridge, including Denise Crosby, who also officiated a wedding on the bridge. There was Michelle Nichols. Who else was there? Gates McFadden took pictures of 1/8 scale Gates McFadden. Yeah,
nice.
And a bunch of other celebrities were there as well.
Well, that sounds like a really good time. And I think there's a convention that's kicking off like the end of next month in Seattle. Kind of makes me want to go. Makes me kind of want to go. But while
the ones in Seattle's in like 2 weeks or something?
Yeah, like really soon. Like I'm looking at my clock going, I better buy tickets if I'm going to go. I got to start getting serious.
Yeah, it's next weekend, actually, I think.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, the 24th. Yeah.
That's probably not going to... Oh my gosh, August has gone by so fast.
I know. It was like the first a minute ago.
Well, news didn't rest while we took some time off. In fact, we've got a bunch of stories to get into. And our first story this week was a headline that when I saw it go by, I thought, I'm just going to wait and let Alan know if I should freak out about this or not. And you could tell me, Alan. I saw the headline. It went, encryption is less secure than we originally thought.
Yeah. So it is, although it's not necessarily a huge deal.
Freak out.
Yes. It's definitely interesting research.
Okay.
So the problem stems from the fact that information theoretic analysis of secure systems, which is this whole new type of science developed in the 50s, generally considered the notion that entropy was evenly distributed. And so, so when we were analyzing cryptographic systems, we always used this concept called Shannon entropy, named after Dr. Shannon, who invented it, or discovered it, or wrote it down.
Right, whatever you want to call it.
So Shannon entropy is based on the average probability that a given string of bits will occur in a particular type of digital file, right? And that the characteristics of the data traffic will quickly converge to a statistical average, meaning that, the chance of any one string of bits happening versus some other string is equal eventually, right? If you have enough data, the chance of any one string happening is the same as any other string, right? But in cryptography, the real concern isn't the average case like that, but the worst case scenario, right? A code breaker needs only one reliable correlation between the encrypted and the unencrypted version of a file in order to start deducing more and more correlations and slowly unraveling the encryption. Right? So if you know, that's where we get things like the known plaintext attack. Right? If you know what part of the original message is, then you can kind of look at the encrypted version and try to find the bit that correlates to that message and find out what the difference between the two is, and then try to work back to uncovering the key and decrypting more and more of the message. So Duffy says, we thought we'd established that the basic premise that everyone was using was fair and reasonable, but it turns out maybe not quite as much.
Uh-oh.
So when the researchers started using other notions of entropy that have been developed since the Shannon entropy in the 50s, which give a greater weight to the improbable outcomes rather than the average outcomes. So they rank the really unlikely stuff as being worth more.
Okay.
They found that slight deviations from perfect uniformity in source files significantly weaken the protection that was provided by the encryption. Right? So if the source file isn't very random, right, it's predictable, then it makes predictable output. As a consequence, wireless card readers used in many keyless entry systems and credit cards and PayWave and things like that might not be as secure as we originally thought. A computer turned loose to simply guess correlations between the encrypted and unencrypted version of a file would make headway much faster than previously expected. Right? Before, we thought it was so hard, nobody would ever bother trying it. Now, maybe it won't be as hard, because we understand that there may be more correlation there than we thought. It's still exponentially hard, but it's exponentially easier than we originally thought. So it's still a really hard thing to do.
But this kind of puts it on the...
It's just not as hard as we thought.
And does that kind of mean maybe we're going to start seeing hardware at some point, and not the near future, but long-term future, that's going to be able to crack some of the stuff we thought was uncrackable?
Basically getting towards that point. One implication is that an attacker who simply relied on the frequency in which letters occur in English words could probably guess a user-selected password much more quickly than we thought in the past.
Okay.
Right? If you're actually, instead of just guessing sequentially passwords, if you started applying, you know, like those grammar rules we talked about a couple months ago.
Yep.
And things like that.
Yep.
Attackers using graphic processors to distribute the problem, you'd be surprised how quickly they might be able to guess stuff. So
it makes sense too if you figure, well, okay, I know the person who created this passphrase. They only speak English, so they're likely, even if they string together, you know, duck stapler 100 times over, they're only going to maybe use 1,000-word possibility. So let's just focus our search on that. Is that what you're saying?
Right, and things like, you know, the chance of the letter Z being in their password is much lower than the chance of the letter E.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, because we don't use it very much.
Exactly. And so by weighting things like that, and with the power of GPUs and distributing across multiple GPUs, you know. Now, this is more cracking encryption than passwords, but it definitely...
one leads to the other in some cases. Yeah. I love this research paper
there's
here, too.
There's a really long article on it from the MIT News site.
And then a crazy
and
research
really
paper.
Good. It's kind of explains the basics and has the higher end stuff at the same time.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I have a link to the actual research paper, which has all the math in it if you want your head to explode.
I've been showing a little bit on the stream. It's pretty intense.
And then there's also an article from about 3 years ago that actually explains the concept of the Shannon limit. And especially if you're at all interested in how wireless works, it actually explains what the Shannon limit is, which is normally any medium for communication has two properties, right? It's the bandwidth, which is the maximum amount of information you can push through the linkage, right? Like, you know, an Ethernet cable has a bandwidth of 100 megabits or 1,000 megabits or whatever, right? And then there's the noise level, right? And the noise is, you know, random stuff that's in there that's going to make your signal come out garbled. So the Shannon limit is what's the maximum amount of bandwidth you can get under certain noise conditions.
Oh, wow. So we're all using that whenever we use Wi-Fi. We're using some of his principles there.
And so it explains, you know, how if you want to send the message 001, and you know there's a lot of noise on the line, you might send the message 3 times, right? So 001, 001, 001. And then when it gets to the other side, when there's a random 1 stuck in there somewhere, because 2 of the 3 aren't corrupted, you know most likely the message was supposed to be 001. Now, that's a very basic version of it, but it goes on to explain how it came up with this system of error-correcting codes so that we could send more. And so, if you've ever wondered why your wireless seems to bounce between fast and slow and stuff, it's actually because it's doing this.
This ratio is changing?
The Shannon limit, yes. So you're sending data, and it's instead of sending a regular, 8-bit byte, it says like a 10-bit byte, right? So that, if there's 2 bits of error, you still get the original message, right? And so that's when you're going to get the top speed of the wireless, like 54 megabits per second, right? But then if the signal goes down, it will change. Instead of using 10 bits, it'll use 16 bits. So now all of a sudden you only get half as much speed as you had originally, right? So now your speed drops to like 23 megabits, right? And then if that's still having packet loss or garbled messages, then you drop another speed, and the speed gets cut in half, and the message gets longer, or each symbol gets longer, but there's better chance of the message actually getting through uncorrupted. And on and on and on. And that's why you'll see that. And, the actual algorithm for doing it wasn't actually invented in the 50s by Shannon. He just described the process of how you would build such a thing. And then later on, in the 80s, and actually in 1993, someone actually built a usable version of it. And that's when we started seeing error-correcting codes for dial-up modems. And that's when all of a sudden, instead of being restricted to 9600 baud modems, we had this error checking so that we could go faster and just deal with the fact that there was noise on the lines.
Wow. This is an example of one of those shoulders that we all now stand on that we don't even really give much appreciation to. I mean, that's a huge breakthrough.
Exactly.
I mean, I was excited with wireless, but modems too?
This was all invented before digital.
Right. Yeah.
This was invented for, the concept of actually radio communications for like the military and stuff.
Incredible.
And then also applied to, things like, this same principle applies over copper cables, over fiber optic, over radios, every communication method.
It's interesting, though, to reflect on the fact that, here he is working on this in the 50s, and we don't see, there's probably many implications of it, but we don't see, in terms of technology, we didn't see some of the implications of it until, like you mentioned, later on, 80s and 90s. So something sat around, probably being used for other things, like you said, military applications, but it's just... Sometimes it's remarkable how there's a breakthrough in it.
I invented this. And they were like, oh, actually, it turns out somebody invented it 30 years ago. We just didn't realize.
That's true. There's probably a lot of that, huh? But I just think it's interesting, the long tail on sometimes...
There's a story about it in the link there that explains what the Shannon limit is. There's a link to a story explaining part 2 of it when error-correcting codes were actually invented.
I think it's fascinating to see how some of these inventions have such a long tail before their full realization has really been appreciated. So interesting stuff. Alan's got that linked in the show notes if you guys want to check that out. And if you want to go try your hand at some math, well, Alan's got a PDF with some hardcore math in there. Somebody in the chat room's already solved it during the show. So
right.
Yeah, right. All right, Alan, well, let's take a second here and thank our first sponsor this week, and it's UnitySync by Directory Wizards. Now, okay, here's why we have this on the TechSNAP program. This is the tool that is going to make you the guy who saved the day in your organization. Because if you are in a position where you have multiple directories that you need to synchronize, and maybe they're crazy different directories. Maybe you've got Active Directory and you've got OpenLDAP, or maybe you've got Zimbra and you've got eDirectory, or you've got iPlanet or Lotus Notes, or something legacy that you've built in-house on top of LDAP, anything like that. UnitySync is a centralized service that synchronizes data between the directories. You install the enterprise-grade server software on a machine, and then you get a web admin interface to manage the UnitySync to say, I want to sync these directories, I want these rules applied, I want to follow these templates, I want to monitor the process. It's really, really powerful stuff. UnitySync can scale from small directories with hundreds of objects to enterprise directories consisting of hundreds of thousands of objects without requiring extensive training or installation configuration time. And the way they've set up their pricing means that you're not going to get dinged later on if your directory grows and grows as your company grows. It's very straightforward. And it's used by huge organizations. You got guys like Anheuser-Busch, the NFL, and many more. In fact, if you go over to derwiz.com, click on UnitySync, And then they've got a section on there where they list out some of their notable customers. I was kind of teasing Alan about this last week. A lot of Canadians on here, actually.
Yep.
So, Alan, you guys are doing something up there that it must... why don't you guys use one directory for everything? That's what I would do, personally. But I know that's not always an option, and that's why UnitySync comes to solve the day. I always think back to when I was really in the thick of contracting, and Active Directory was being rolled out to many organizations, and I would come in and, we've just bought Company X, and we're kind of integrated, but we're kind of not integrated. We'd love to be able to bring some information between these directories, and maybe it's an email directory, maybe it's Active Directory, maybe it's Exchange, maybe it's an HR directory, anything like that. UnitySync would have solved that problem for me. Man, did I have to create the most crazy scripts to do this, and of course, then it was on my shoulders to make sure it was working, make sure the cron job was executing when it was supposed to. UnitySync automates all of this. It's enterprise-grade software, folks, and it's under 5 megabytes. If you go over to derwiz.com and you enter in the code TECH, when you download it, you'll get an extended 30-day trial and the first year of maintenance for free. Check it out. You can do a full or partial sync. You can go deep dive with a Perl scripting interface. Link your HR SQL database that has the latest names and phone numbers with your Active Directory, so that way when HR updates the application, it automatically updates your centralized directory. Or hell, I'm sure you can come up with something. Just go download it. Go to derwiz.com, click on UnitySync, and then use the code TECH to get an extended trial, and then your first year of maintenance free. If you decide to pull the trigger, this is going to solve the problem that you've been struggling with and make you the hero of your organization. So thanks to Directory Wizards and UnitySync for sponsoring the TechSNAP program.
Yeah, I remember that would have been very useful back when I was in the IT department at the college, because they had this Active Directory domain and they had a Unix server, and the solution they were using limited them to 2,000 users.
Oh.
Or sorry, 1,000 users. And they had
ouch.
like 1,200 users, and they were basically stuck. They had to make a workaround. And it's like, because the licensing there was per user, whereas with this one it's per directory, right?
Yeah, which is very clever and makes it much more straightforward for management. And I'll tell you, before we brought them on as a sponsor, I was having a Skype call with the owner of the company, and I was like, wait a minute, could you repeat that again? He would give me a scenario of like some of his clients. I said, oh my gosh, you would have saved me so much stress. I mean, it really is pretty impressive. And those of you out there who have struggled with things like this, you know exactly the kind of trouble it can be, and have a system that automates it. So guys, go check it out and let them know that you appreciate them supporting the TechSNAP program. Alan, when I saw that you had a story in the show notes about Red Hat, I assumed it must be something negative. But after reading the headline, I'm thinking it's not. What do you got?
Right. So Red Hat has introduced what they call the Red Hat Software Collections 1.0.
All right.
It's actually still in beta, but it's pretty interesting. So as people know, Red Hat Enterprise Linux provides long-term support not only for the OS, but for all the included packages. Right? That means that the version of PHP that ships with Red Hat Enterprise Linux 6 stays the same through the entirety of Red Hat Enterprise Linux 6, right? So the version that's included in the original distribution is maintained for the entire life of that version of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So security fixes get backported, but new features do not. Now that's both a good thing and a bad thing, right? New features often have new bugs, and you don't want to break your production application. So the fact that they don't go and just randomly upgrade the version of PHP mean you have to worry about, is your application compatible with this newer software, right? You just get the same version the whole time and your application just works, right? So it's definitely a useful feature. But at the same time, you have this new application that either requires or would really benefit from the newer features of PHP.
Yes,
right?
We've run that a lot.
Yeah, and so at that point, you don't have that option, right? Especially since, if you're in a type of corporate environment where you need to have official supported packages and things like that. You don't want to just be using some random Yum repo by some guy that you don't know who might stick a backdoor in the
exactly
in the
what I usually end up doing, and I do it begrudgingly. I think, well, they've got this application, I need this version, and I don't want to have to worry about updates in 2 months, so I'm going to do it. And this is what.
Right, but also, if you're trusting some random guy, you don't know he's going to be around to have the updated version for you in the future either. Actually,
it's a huge problem, because then 6 months I come back to the box, I go to do a Yum update, and this repo isn't responding, and this repo isn't responding. It's a big pain in the butt.
Exactly. So the Red Hat Software Collections, quote, helps users build and deploy web applications through dynamic languages and databases. So basically, this is an official repository from Red Hat that provides Ruby a 1.9.3 with Rails 3.2.8, Python version 2.7 and 3.3, PHP 5.4, Perl 5.16, Node.js version 0.10, MariaDB or MySQL 5.5, and Postgres 9.2. Which are much more modern versions of all of those than what are included in Red Hat Enterprise Linux 6.
Right, and they say these...
For example, in 6, you only get MySQL 5.1, which doesn't support a couple of the new features in 5.5, and which can especially make a difference if you're using things like SSDs.
And they're saying they're going to support these collections for 3 years, so you're going to get updates.
Supported along with your, whatever version of Red Hat Enterprise Linux you have. The Red Hat Software Collection 1.0 beta is available now for any Red Hat Enterprise Linux 6 customers or partners that have an active Red Hat Enterprise Linux server or Red Hat Enterprise Linux workstation or developer-related subscription. So to get access to this, you have to be a Red Hat subscriber.
This is a really good approach, and I don't mean to disparage them, but it honestly to me feels a little bit like a Band-Aid. I kind of feel like the Red Hat package management solution accommodates the old day of servers where you didn't have this top layer that was moving at a very aggressive, very rapid pace. You kind of, you had NFS, you had DNS, you had Apache, and that, those you could go every 3 years even without having to update to the next major version. But nowadays...
Except for just security fixes.
Right, yeah, exactly. Yep. Nowadays, distributions like Arch and systems like FreeBSD, where you have the base system and then this external software repository is built on demand. It's a different approach. It's a much more moving target approach, especially in the case of Arch, but it's a much more modern in some ways. Like when I start looking at this, it sounds like they're patching, they're band-aiding a system that doesn't really solve the problems of a lot of web servers now.
If this newer one is updated on a regular basis, then it kind of does solve the problem. Like, you brought up FreeBSD. In FreeBSD 4 and older, Perl was included in the base system because, everybody needed Perl. But the version wouldn't be updated with, 4.1, 4.2, 4.3, right? It was stuck at whatever version was out when 4.0 came out. So that left us with Perl 5.0, right? And everybody wanted like 5.3.
Yeah, sure.
So eventually for 5, they removed Perl from base and you installed it from the port tree.
So I guess the one thing I'm kind of looking for is they're not really talking about, so you can get it through the Red Hat subscription network, but they're not talking about when they're going to update it. Like, is this going to be a 6-month cycle? They're not really saying.
I don't know. But really, I can see the point of the original Red Hat way as well. Right? If you're an enterprise, you're probably not building new software all that often.
Right.
You have this application you built, and you're going to use it for like 5 years. Yeah. And so you want this version of PHP that's not going to constantly be updated and break your app.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Like, we actually looked when PHP 5.3 came out, Scale Engine was going to jump to it right away, but it broke about a third of all of our customers' apps, including WordPress. But especially vBulletin was horrible on 5.3 at first. Now, eventually, those software got updated and the problem went away. But we're basically looking at the same problem with switching to 5.5. Is there's a bunch of these, backwards incompatible changes that mean that all the software must be updated before we can move forward.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And in that scenario, the old Red Hat method approach is really solid. It's almost like...
So if you're an enterprise, then you need something like Red Hat Enterprise Linux. But if you're a web host and you have, people are wanting to install the latest, greatest PHP thing every week, then that solution doesn't work for you.
I think what this is a response to is I think a lot of that market is gone to Ubuntu long-term support, especially like on the EC2 type setups. I mean, that is what Canonical makes money. Like if Canonical one day were to like shut everything down except for their cloud business, they would immediately become a profitable business. So they've gone from like this small-time player in the server space to this massive player in the server space. And I wonder if this is sort of Red Hat's response to this. And what they've said, I looked it up on their site, they're going to update the collection bundle every 18 months approximately. And each major release stream, each version of the selected component remains backwards compatible, which is a pretty good touch. So this is sort of like, okay, we know you've invested in Red Hat Enterprise Linux, we know you've standardized on this, but they're kind of this, I think, is Red Hat's acknowledgement, we're not meeting those needs, this is their solution to it.
Right. Well, I think part of it is, one of the biggest purchasers of Red Hat licenses are Rackspace, right? Because if you go with a Rackspace server, you're actually getting Red Hat Enterprise Linux with a subscription. And a lot of people are using that for these newer applications like Node.js. And so having a really legacy version of that is not really an option, especially with something like a really fast-moving target like Node.js.
Yeah.
So I think, like you said, that might only be a Band-Aid in this case, because Node.js being stuck at 0.10 for 18 months probably isn't going to be much better. It's good now, but it might not be much better down the road.
Well,
although they may introduce a newer version of the collection where you can jump ahead to a newer snapshot or choose to stay on the older snapshot.
Isn't this kind of an interesting problem that Windows servers don't even really deal with, because the base OS is so detached from the application level that you would just download the installer and install it, and you just continue to upgrade it on Windows. And Arch Linux also solved this problem.
You see the problem there where, an application will say, I only work with Windows XP.
Oh, yeah, sure.
You're on 7 now, so you're screwed.
Yeah, you got to upgrade to the new server version.
So you have back and forth problems like that. But yeah, that's why I think the FreeBSD approach of having the applications be completely separate from the OS makes a big difference in that case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is kind of I remember one of the big kind of quote-unquote FUD pieces back in the day when there was this period of time where people didn't want to run Linux on servers because there's a lot of questions. It was like in the heat of the SCO battle. I was working at the bank when the SCO lawsuit first flared up. My CTO, because we were deploying Linux at the time, sat down and said, all right, we're putting a hold on all of the Linux deployments. I told the story on Linux Action Show probably 7 years ago. We're putting a hold on all of our Linux deployments because there's this patent uncertainty around the Linux operating system, and we're not sure if we want to deploy anymore. We think we might stick with Windows because that's a safe area. And now here we are, like in this total 180, where like it's completely been answered, and now it's sort of like now we're at the next phase of which distribution can keep us the most up to date in some areas, but keep the base system stable in other areas. And I think, when Red Hat's got all of these packages as part of their base system, it's a little bit of a harder, ship for them to turn than it is for something like FreeBSD. Interesting.
Right, because it decouples the two things, right? There's the OS and then the apps instead of an OS with apps and then trying to update those. But the only reason Linux exists is because of a similar lawsuit against BSD back in the...
Gonna bring that up, huh? You had to bring up was that AT&T?
Yeah, AT&T suing BSDI.
Right. Yeah.
Which was resolved, but the uncertainty it created caused...
So, and I think that's what SCO was going for, right? That's what they were trying to...
well, I don't think they were trying to drive people to use Windows, no. But they were trying to drive people to pay them... Well, it's like, we see this where all the companies that manufacture Android phones paying Microsoft to avoid this patent battle.
Right.
And yes, that was SCO's hope was that they would just get every bank and big business and IBM that was using Linux would just pay them a big license fee to avoid.
That's where Microsoft got the idea.
I'm sure, yes.
Because you remember
they just executed it better.
Back then, one of the big controversies was that Microsoft wrote SCO a big fatty check during the lawsuit. And Microsoft said, well, we're not funding this lawsuit they're doing. We just happen to need to license some of the SCO Unix code, so we wrote them a big fatty check. And then that really, Microsoft went, hey, you know what? That's a great idea for a failing company whose software product's on the decline. Let's just make everybody pay licensing fees. And now that's one of the larger sources of income for mobile that Microsoft has is Android licensing. They make more money off that than they do actually selling Windows Mobile.
Yeah, exactly.
Pretty wild. Well, good for Red Hat. Good job on them.
For users that don't have a subscription or are using CentOS,
that's what I was wondering.
There is iUS, right? The existing community-powered repository of updated software that spawned out of this same problem. Originally, it was actually an internal thing at Rackspace, and then it became a community-wide thing that anybody could use.
And you can find that at iuscommunity.org.
Yeah.
Cool.
I was just talking to one of the developers of it yesterday or something, and he actually told me about this Red Hat story. And I was like, oh, yes.
Now, these you think are guys we can trust then?
Yes.
Yeah. And they kind of have a community built around, and they're not going to just go away, which is...
Right, exactly. It's actually, sponsored by Red Hat, or Rackspace. And,
oh, yeah, right.
Yeah, there's people whose day job it is to maintain this so that you can have the modern version of MySQL on your CentOS box instead of 5.1.
Yeah. In fact, they've been around since 2006. So they've been doing it for a little while now. So I don't think they're going anywhere. That's iuscommunity.org.
If you're a big corporation and you want the version that goes in your support contract...
Well, and if you're already paying for it, too.
then you can have the Red Hat software collection instead.
In my experience, what happens in most companies that are of a certain size, anything that's in production, you buy Red Hat Enterprise Linux for. Anything on the test bench, you run CentOS. And, you do your test deployments, you do your test VMs with CentOS, and then you have your Red Hat Enterprise subscription for your production systems. And it's expensive, the Red Hat Enterprise, but it is actually a pretty good service. I have called them up, more times than I could count for different clients and stuff. I've had some bad experiences, but I've never gotten to the point where I was in this spot with Red Hat where they were trying to pin it on Dell, and Dell was trying to pin it on Red Hat, right? Classic situation that the IT guy finds himself in. And I started getting a little frustrated because I was jammed up in this tiny little server room in Paulsbo, Washington, where I had no cell reception, and so it's just this impossible deal when I'm doing phone support. And to Red Hat's credit, they eventually just said, well, you know what, we'll call Dell. We'll explain the situation to Dell. And they worked it out for me and then got back to me with, and it was I can't remember, it was something with a storage driver or something. I can't recall what the problem was now, but I was really impressed. I thought, well, okay, we got our money's worth this time. Got the system back online and everything was working.
And, a lot of companies, that's why they pay for the support contract.
Yep.
Not because they think they'll need it, but because, it's basically like buying insurance. They know if something goes badly wrong, there's someone we can call and sort it out. We're not going to be stuck in a bind trying to figure out what the problem is.
And then there's some corporations where, they're completely comfortable supporting that in-house, and they're quote-unquote self-insuring, right? They're rolling their own systems, and they manage it themselves. Yeah. All right, Alan, why don't we take a moment here to thank our second sponsor this week. Are you ready?
Yes.
That would be GoDaddy.com. That's right, GoDaddy.com is rocking the great $2.49.com special if you use the code TECH249. Here's the good news. If we use the link in our show notes, you also get their new Express Pathway checkout. That's just boom. It's like greased lightning, you guys. You get in there, it's laser focused. They figure the TechSNAP audience, they're savvy. They know what you want. You know what you want.
They don't need to be upsold. They know exactly what they want.
No, I mean, you could go if you just want to get a whole bunch of stuff, you could go the regular traditional route. I'm not going to hold it against you. But if you want the greased lightning route, specially hand-coded by Danica Patrick, then you use the link in our show notes and use the code TECH240. Actually, the code's already applied if you use the link in our show notes, too. But if you just happen to be browsing or you're on the mobile app, use the code TECH249 when you check out. You get a .com for $2.49. Think about that. Think about what you can do with a .com for $2.49. You got an invitation to a party? Use it. Just get a simple domain. You got a crazy-ass Google Plus profile link that's way too long because Google doesn't know how URLs work, apparently. Get a .com. Have it redirect. You got yourself an audio stream? Get a .com. You got a new blog? Get a .com. You got a baby on the way? Get a .com. Everybody, get yourself a .com. Use the code TECH249 when you check out to get yourself a .com for $2.49. Or if you want to get a whole bunch of stuff, get some hosting, maybe get a cert, get a few different domains. Use the code GO32 off 3 when you check out. You're going to get everything in that cart for 32% off. Damn. I think that's only for new purchases, but that's still a great deal. And those codes are...
It worked for, I bought a .tv domain.
Oh, really? Oh, really? For yourself? I want to know about it.
Kind of.
Sounds interesting. Oh! Can't say anything yet. Anyways, so go to GoDaddy.com, or actually, better yet, use the link in our show notes, and you get that Express Pathway checkout. Yep. And you get a .com for $2.49. At that rate, it's like real estate, people. Go buy up 30 of them, and then maybe one of them will be good, in 5 years from now, and you can sell it for $10,000. Right?
No, squatting is bad.
Right. Don't squat. Here's what you could do. For $2.49, you could help out the TechSNAP program. If there is an episode that you think you could sum up with a .com, you could go register it and then have that .com point to our episode page, and you could tell people, go check out, encryption is crackable.com or whatever. It's not only would it help with link building for us, but it's an easy way to recommend people go check out the favorite episodes of the TechSNAP program that you love. And GoDaddy makes it super easy to redirect that URL to anywhere you want. So thanks to GoDaddy for sponsoring the TechSNAP program, and thanks to you guys for supporting our sponsors and keeping us on the air. Yep. It's the circle of love. Alan, you didn't show the recorded folks your awesome shirt, and I love that you actually have a badge on there too. Do you want to show it real quick for the video viewers? It says, for you audio listeners, it says, "I'm not insane. My mother had me tested," by Sheldon Cooper. And you've got the Sheldon Cooper ID badge too.
Yes, I bought that at the Star Trek convention.
You are hardcore, sir. All right, well, a service that I believe you use, EasyDNS, had a bad couple of days this week, didn't they?
I don't actually use them, but I've heard of them.
Oh, okay. All right. I thought
big.
you were an EasyDNS guy.
DNS Made Easy I use.
Oh, that's what it was.
We'll get to it in a minute.
Okay.
So EasyDNS has been under a denial of service attack for the last couple of days. And they have a status blog about that and explaining what the issues are and how they're dealing with it and how they're mitigating it. But also it brought up a past article they have about, it's called Denial of Service Attacks and DNS, how to stay up if your DNS provider goes down. And they actually get into the details of how even as their core business is doing DNS, they recommend you use not just them, but them and one of their competitors to eliminate a single point of failure.
Oh, really? How about that?
Yep. They highly recommend that if your site is mission critical, that you use more than one DNS provider, or maybe as many as you can get, to eliminate any single point of failure. And since they originally came out with this idea, they've actually built an extra product around it.
They have?
Yes. So during a previous denial of service attack, they actively worked with some of their competitors, like DNS Made Easy, who I use, and DNS Simple, to mitigate the issue and to actually develop filters to block this specific type of attack. So basically, because they and their competitors were both under this certain type of attack, they collaborated on developing a way to block the attack. And from that, they've also built these other products. So I use DNSMadeEasy.com for about 10 years now, and it handles a bunch of things. Like they have, they can deal with really high load. Like at one point, I was getting like 1 million DNS queries a day, which is a lot of packets.
Yeah.
And it provides faster response time than I could with my own servers because they're anycast all over the world. It means that when someone's in England, they don't randomly get sent to the DNS server in Los Angeles, which is halfway across the world from them.
Yeah.
They hit one, in Europe somewhere, so it's faster. They also have managed DNS, where I have things like automatic failover. We've discussed this in a previous episode, TechSNAP, way back, where, if this web server goes down, it automatically changes the DNS record to point to the second web server or to this third one, right? And it's got failover like that. But also I used it for secondary DNS for a couple hundred domains that I hosted for other people, right? So I had my web server, but I needed secondary DNS so that all the load wasn't on my web server, or if the DNS on my web server was down or whatever. And so to make sure that people's email records still worked even if the website was down, we used them to host all the backup domains. Yeah, so EasyDNS has introduced this new feature called proactive name servers. Whereas if you actually move your domain to EasyDNS so that they're the registrar, they can automatically change the name servers on your domain, right? So it's the same idea as that automatic failover I was just describing, where they change the A record for the website to a second web server. In this one, they would actually change the DNS records, like the whois records on what name servers are authoritative for your domain. So they monitor the name servers you have listed, and if one or more of those goes down, they swap in backup ones in their place.
Nice.
One of the main advantages to this is the attacker, when they start attacking you, they only see the name servers you have listed. They don't know where your backups are, and your backups only kick in as the other ones go down. So then the attacker has to watch for these backup ones and start the attack afresh on these new backup servers, right? So it keeps them from knowing where, so they can't take out all your servers at once, because you have this pool of secret backup servers that keep getting slotted in. And, during the attack, you can actively go and add even more.
Right.
So that way you're basically become a moving target, and it helps keep your DNS up.
So you could do things like, if it was like, this is going to be an ongoing attack, what's that service that helps them absorb some of the traffic out there for these kinds of things? There's a company out there selling that now, and I'm blanking on their name, but you could point to them.
There's a couple different ones.
Yeah. Cloudflare?
DOSRest is one that I've used. Cloudflare does something.
Cloudflare's one I'm thinking of, yeah.
They're mostly a web application firewall.
But you could go in there and you could dynamically say, all right, boy, throw all the Cloudflare servers in here. I'm ready to start paying for that because I got a big problem, right? And you could pull them out and save yourself some money when you're not having problems.
Exactly. Or same even with DNS Made Easy, right? A lot of these ones are based on a volume of traffic. So you have these spares where you're paying just a small flat yearly fee or whatever, and then you pay for usage during the attack instead of having to pay for them all the time.
Nice.
So they have this system where, you can export your records let other services pull the records out of your EasyDNS, or the other way around, have EasyDNS pull out of DNS Made Easy or whatever, and then that way you have all these extra name servers that are just standing by and ready to get flipped in right away. And you can even, that way you have, if you have an internal DNS at your office, you can have it quietly be sucking in the records from your real public-facing server so that your internal one still works separately.
Yeah.
And, so this basically, after they suggested the idea, they actually built a product around being able to automate it instead of having to do it by hand.
I'm kind of surprised they haven't done it already. It seems right up their alley. It's brilliant. And I guess the problem is
they developed the new product last year.
Would you kind of, I guess, at first they were like, well, do we want to give business to our competitors? I mean, they had to have that conversation, right? It seems like
a little bit, but more it was along the line of they had to become a domain name registrar in order to be able to change your DNS records programmatically. Right? Otherwise, they would have to use the API for some other registrar,
right? And which could change.
Introduces problems with, if they're under attack, how do they make sure that they're able to reach out and make these changes?
Right. Yeah, they might not be able to do it.
But also, they also introduced a feature to sync your DNS records to Amazon Route 53 via that API.
Okay.
So that you can use Amazon as the backup, and also just so that you can have your records exported somewhere. It also means that if your backup provider happens to also support sync with Amazon Route 53, you can use it as like the common point to push records back and forth.
Oh, that's nice. And you got to hope that Route 53 is not going down.
Right. Well, it's Amazon, so it will, but
right.
Hopefully just not at the same time.
We covered it as a story a long time ago. It might have even just been a Roundup story. You remember how we covered that story about how Amazon had been awarded the contract to build the CIA cloud?
Yes, it was going to be a private cloud. It was basically a private version of Amazon AWS.
Right, which we speculated they would then use that opportunity to sort of re-implement all of their wish list items on the federal budget and then go and improve their other service. But anyways, it was delayed, right? And so Amazon is now suing to get that project to resume so they can get that contract so they can build that data center. It's really something. It's something to watch that go on. But yeah, it's something behind the scenes. Very interesting, Alan. Any other thoughts on that one?
Nope, that's about it for that.
All right, well, very good. Alan's got links to all of that good info in the show notes, including a little video about how their proactive name servers work. And it sounds like a pretty cool deal. Pretty cool deal. All right, Alan. Well, with the news all done, that means it's time for the TechSNAP feedback. Thanks for sending your emails to TechSNAP at jupiterbroadcasting.com or popping that contact link at the top of our website, or even better, starting a thread in our subreddit like nobody did in this week's feedback over at links.techsnap.tv. It's actually not entirely true, but none of them that got selected this week because they already sufficiently answered in the subreddit itself, which is also great. I really appreciate it when the community just kind of chimes in and gets people information right away. So, Alan, before we...
Share the knowledge.
Right, share the knowledge. Before we answer our first email, I wanted to do a little self-plug because I think people out there in the community might be interested in this. Launched a new show on Monday. It's kind of a beta, but it was a big hit. It was called Linux Unplugged, and it is an adjunct to the Linux Action Show. It's more of a lifestyle show, whereas Linux Action Show is very focused, high-energy, news, tips, tricks, how to get things done, use Linux. This is more of a laid-back, talk-style, lifestyle show where we maybe get a little more dirty with things about Linux. Well, we kind of got flamed for our discussion around KDE, but we get into the dirt on stuff, but not that kind of dirty. So go check out Linux Unplugged. New show, episode 1, just launched on Monday. And it'll come out probably, I think we're going to keep it Mondays. We might move it later, but we'll let people know. It was good. I get really good reception on the new show.
Cool.
All right, we got a question that came in. One for you, one for me. First one to me says, I was wondering about LastPass. This is, by the way, from listener Matt. I noticed you're using it, and I was a customer of theirs back in 2009, but they had a major security failure. Are they pretty safe now compared to Mozilla Sync? I refuse to use Chrome Sync due to their relation with NSA. Well, now, first of all, the security issue back in 2009 wasn't that dramatic. It was more like a, hey, this could have happened, we're being super proactive and letting you guys know about it type thing. It wasn't like a, oh my God, our database has been decrypted and they've gotten everything. In fact, there was never any evidence that actually anything had ever actually been captured. It was just they were being proactive. So yeah, I've been using it since before that. So since before, I don't know. I mean, since LastPass has been a thing, I've been using it. And I do think it's more secure for sure than Firefox Sync or Chrome Sync.
Right, because the reason why Chrome specifically says they don't encrypt the password store with a master password is because it gives a false sense of security. Because the password store in Chrome, if someone has physical access to your computer, they can get all your stuff.
Yeah, it was big hoopla while we were on break. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a big story on Hacker News about it, and they're like, well, do you really want us to provide some level of obfuscation? Is like, if we base 64 encode it, will that make you happy? Because it doesn't accomplish anything.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And, you can see the point there. You need to have it stored securely somewhere. And, if your computer, sitting on your hard drive isn't physically secure, you need to deal with that some other way, like using PEFS or something to actually encrypt the directory where Chrome stores that.
I mean, honestly, I actually have used that Chrome revealing the passwords in plain text as when I'm filling in for an IT guy. And you always work, when you fill in for the IT guy when he's on vacation, you always work at his computer because he's got all of the connections set up, he's got all of the bookmarks in his browser, and he's got all the passwords saved in Chrome. And so when you need to go log into an SSH terminal, you just go look at what the login was for the web app on that same server, you go into Chrome, you show a password, copy it, paste it into PuTTY, and you're logged into the server. So for me, it was like, I knew about this for years because for about a year and a half period, I was using it regularly just to sort of fill in gaps. But it doesn't mean you have to use LastPass either. For the Mac, there's 1Password. People rave about it if you're a Mac user. And for multiple platforms, there's KeePass, which is an open source password storage system, and then you don't have to worry about LastPass servers if you've got a way to... Yes,
because I've set up KeePass for a friend of mine. We set up WebDAV so that it's KeePass on multiple devices, all synced to a database on one of my servers over SSH, it was over HTTPS.
Perfect.
Right, so over an SSL connection, it would sync the password database between all of his devices, and then all he has to do is enter his master password, and he gets all his passwords and can log in from any of his devices. So yes, if you don't trust LastPass, look at KeePass because it's open source. You can trust it more.
I've gone to the point now
where the difference with KeePass is it's up to you to store the database securely. If you're not comfortable with that, then use LastPass. If you aren't comfortable with LastPass, then do it yourself.
Yeah.
And realize that, when it goes wrong, it's your fault, not theirs.
All right, so here's his question for you. He says, I see a lot of advantages to BSD, and I want to start learning it, specifically for data storage. However, I work in a major tech center in Irvine, and companies like Verizon, Microsoft, Samsung, etc. are here. And I have done consultant work for many of them, Oracle as well. But in all my experience, none of the companies have had a single BSD box installed. I'm just wondering if it's worth my time to learn an OS versus just an appliance OS. All of them are running some flavor of CentOS, Red Hat Enterprise, or Oracle's bastardized version of Cent. Also, is the performance really hindered on a ZOL? I'm working for a financial company now next door to Microsoft, and they're running Dell EqualLogix arrays with Extended 4. I would love to put ZFS on there with FreeNAS, but I doubt it's possible with these devices. Either way, I would like to show them the features. Any suggestions on getting them on board? And if I mention BSD, will they stop listening immediately and walk off? So I use the word appliance. Maybe that'll work. Keep up the great work, and please, don't bash Linux. He says, by the way, he's also been watching Jupiter Broadcasting since before we called it Jupiter Broadcasting. That's a while now. So what do you think?
There's a couple things. Part of the reason people aren't using BSD as much is because there's not as many people that know about BSD, right? A lot of them didn't know about it, so didn't use it, or they didn't have sysadmins that knew it to be able to use it.
Or the pain point wasn't high enough to make them go look.
Right. But if you learn it, then you might be able to convert the next place you work to using it. And
CFS
if you want
kind of
help
sells
with that,
itself too. I mean, really.
There's at BSDCan this year, so 2013, there was a talk about converting a Linux shop to BSD and the steps and basically how to persuade them to see your point of view. It's actually it's not really tongue in cheek. It's really how to make them understand.
What are some of the things you have to think about when converting? Because, I've converted Linux file servers to BSD servers and vice versa. And for me, it was like, make sure your UID and GIDs map up, make sure the share names are the same, copy the data over.
This is more of a high-level look. It's how to convince your manager to let you switch everything.
Oh, this is exactly what he needs.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's called the case study switching from Linux to FreeBSD, how technology-supported advocacy in experience points conversion.
It's funny. I actually
there's a video
think
and slides and everything.
I think it's one of those things where FreeBSD specifically, is about to see a major surge because of the demands of these massive data sets. Big data is here. It's a real thing, it turns out. And people want ZFS, and people want native, reliable, supported ZFS implementations. And these appliances that run CentOS or Oracle OS that are connected to Ecologix boxes, it's really not going to be too long until those things are probably running their own version of some sort of FreeNAS, because these storage companies are looking at what ZFS can do, and they're looking at what Extended 4 can do. And in order to do an array with an Extended 4, they are wrapping it in so much of their custom Mojo and interface software and management utilities. They could streamline all of that if they standardized it and just made it, like, essentially do what FreeNAS does and put a web interface on top of the zpool tools and things like that. To me, it seems so obvious that's the direction things need, unless Linux has a rabbit they're about to pull out of their butt with ButterFS, which, I'm telling you, I've been running ButterFS for a year, and there's no rabbit there.
And nobody wants a rabbit that's been pulled out of your butt anyway.
Well, and especially one that's just been pulled out of your butt, right? Like if the rabbit was pulled out of your butt maybe 5 years ago, if it's a 5-year-old rabbit, maybe then I might put my enterprise-grade data on there, but until then, I mean, you're joking. If you're coming to me and you want me to store my data on ButterFS, give me a break. I'll put my home partition on there, but I'm not putting my company's valuable data on there. So I think when companies start looking at that, I think where you're at right now, Matt, is you're ahead of the trend. I think it's,
so learn it and you'll be invaluable.
I think you'll be meeting. I think if you start learning it now, as the trend starts getting there, you'll meet it in the middle. That's my theory, and I say that as a long-time guy who's been deploying Linux. But now, just for me, myself, I just got done redeploying a FreeNAS box because I want native, built-in ZFS support.
Yep.
Ben writes in on the active.
Well, the other thing I was going to mention, just from the video for the converting from Linux, the steps are fairly simple. First, you have to understand the need for the change. So why are you trying to promote switching from Linux to FreeBSD?
What are you going to get from it?
Then you enlist a core change team to help you drive it forward. Then you envision what it is, you develop the vision and the strategy for the conversion, right? Then you have to motivate, right? Create a sense of urgency of why we need to change right now, not later on. And then you have to communicate that with the other stakeholders. And then you actually take your action, and then you consolidate and clean it up. And, by going through all this, you can actually see how...
Mm-hmm. If you've moved from...
If this happens a couple times, then it helps drive these changes.
Converting from a BSD box to a Linux box is way easier than switching from like a Linux machine to a Linux box or a FreeBSD box. Like it is... I mean, you could do one you could do in the night while all of the employees are away, and the other you need to make a multi-week plan on how you're going to approach it. It is, So,
yeah, I've actually done. There was a web cluster for another podcast. It's actually a blogging platform around a podcast.
A competitor of mine? Flipping the table.
Yeah, this was years ago. Oh. This was before I met you. They had 4 Linux servers and then a Linux database server. And so what I did was I replaced each of those 4 Linux servers one at a time with FreeBSD machines, and then eventually actually did a downtime to switch the database server over, and got all 5 machines up as FreeBSD, and the performance increase was amazing. Part of that was also adding Nginx as a load balancer and stuff, but and more just. I could make changes now that I understood what was happening. The Linux thing had been set up by some other person that I didn't know, and there was no documentation, and I didn't know what the hell was going on, and it was just tuned awfully poorly. It was all packaged software instead of compiled software, so it wasn't tuned to exactly what we were doing. There were some missing features.
You cleaned that right up, didn't you?
I did.
All right.
And then somebody destroyed it later on.
Oh, anyway. That's what happens. You build something beautiful. I know we're going on long on this first email.
And basically when they switch back to Linux, they're like, oh, we need more machines now.
I had the most amazing centralized storage VMware setup. It was so beautiful, so scalable. It was one of my proudest infrastructures I had ever built. So gorgeous. And like the client was willing to spend the money. And so we really built something great. And then they finally hired their final IT director, and he just came in and mutilated it. It was so hard to watch it happen, Alan. It was so beautiful. All right, Ben writes in with some AD replacement advice. He says, "Hi, Alan and Chris. I was just listening to TechSNAP 120. I figured I'd write you about my solution to replace Active Directory. I have a small client, 4 full-time employees, and another 5 or so part-timers that work a few hours a week. They're running Small Business Server 2003 as a domain controller, the file server, print server, etc. The server was getting old and running out of space, so I naturally suggested FreeNAS as a replacement. After a little discussion, it was decided that since there were so many part-time employees that share a few computers, it would be easier to manage them with a single sign-on system. In addition, they had some applications in use that were using the old AD domain for authentication, so we decided to give Samba 4 a try. I set up FreeBSD server on the new hardware, got all of the storage set up using ZFS, and installed Samba 4 from the ports tree. Provisioning the domain was simple as running samba-tool domain provision --use RFC 2307. And then it's done. Answer a couple of questions, and that's it. I configured the LDAP database, set up the internal DNS server, which, by the way, Samba provides all of these itself. It provides its own internal DNS. You can do dynamic DNS. This is me adding this. You can configure to use bind, but that's a little more work. And then you set up the administrator account, which is what is truly beautiful is you can use the administrative tools for Server 2008 to manage the users, groups, and even the group policy. Although a few things don't quite work there. Since my clients were used to being able to use users' computer snapping for configuring users on Server 2003, I don't have to get a phone call every time the user account needs to be changed. So far, it's working great. Keep up the great work on all of the JB shows. That sounds like a win, right? Nice. You get super simple. He's running, you're going to love this, on BSD. And the fact that you can manage it with the Server 2008 tools, that's money. Yep. I like that.
Exactly.
I also think it's really cool how Samba does its own, I mean, you could think of it also as kind of scary, but the fact that it does its own internal LDAP and DNS.
Well, it just means it's easier to configure. Yeah, you don't have to.
Exactly.
You don't have to go and learn Open LDAP.
Well, and that's exactly
one of the
what
biggest
Active Directory
barriers
does.
to me setting it up was the fact that I had to learn Open LDAP and figure it out.
If you had to install Open LDAP and configure it to listen to connections and I mean all these things you'd have to do just to get LDAP up and running, Samba solves all of that, and that's really what Active Directory does too. When you install it, Active Directory sets up a LDAP compatible directory. It sets up DNS and turns on dynamic resolution and configures it to work with DHCP. It's a good setup. So. Anyways, that sounds like quite a success story with Samba 4, Ben. So that's exactly what we were looking for.
Yeah, now we just got to look at bundling that as a plugin jail for FreeNAS.
That would be money. They would really, they would really do well with that. Matthias writes in, he says, "Hi, great show. I have a question about hard drives." So he's looking at maybe an external route. He's a bit unsure if an external hard drive array will work with FreeNAS 9.1. I want to use a 4+ bay, and I'd like to be able to hot swap if a drive fails. Any tips on an external box that fits the bill? I want to be able to do so with RAID Z, and so I can serve all my picks to myself. You have the great work on the shows. So Matthias is asking about an external drive array. Did you use mini?
Well, he doesn't mention how he's connecting it, so that
he doesn't.
Makes the biggest difference.
That does.
If you're connecting to eSATA, as long as that eSATA controller is supported, you're good to go. Same with you're going with external SAS. As long as your SAS controller is supported, you're good to go.
I have right here this.
I would basically, if you're picking a controller to use, if it says LSI, it's good to go.
Yeah. I got so I just got done doing this for LAS recently, so I have all the props right here. I got a Rocket Raid card, which is working with FreeNAS right now. And then I have this ProBox 8-drive array, external eSATA and USB 3.0 unit. I covered all of this in a recent Linux Action show, and I showed the FreeNAS 9.1 setup too. This is an 8-bay unit. However, I'm only seeing 5 bay. I'm only seeing 5 of the drives, and I've tried 2 different controllers, so I'm wondering if it might be this guy. But otherwise, I really, really, really like this unit. This one doesn't do RAID itself, so these all just show up as it's a JBOD, so each drive.
And that's what you want. With ZFS anyway.
Right, so I just let ZFS do the RAID stuff.
It lets you save money anyway, so I wouldn't, don't spend money on one that's a fancy RAID controller if you don't want it.
ZFS knows what it's doing, so yeah. So I have one of these right now attached to a FreeNAS Mini, and I have another external unit. So I have 2 eSATA units right now attached to a FreeNAS Mini, working just fine. Total of 24 terabytes worth of external storage, all with ZFS. Yep. So there you go, Matthias.
Sexy.
Yeah, it's nice. Sorry. All right, so next email, Alan, comes in, and this one is right up your alley. It's from Leon. He says, "Hi there, Chris and Al. Since FreeBSD now has a decent package manager, package NG, mere mortals like myself can now understand it. I've decided to have another look at FreeBSD. However, I'm struggling a bit with mixing packages and ports. For example, I've installed everything from packages except for Bacula. I wanted that with MySQL support, not Postgres. How do I manage that? I assume whenever there's a new package for Bacula and I do a package upgrade, the custom port install is going to be overridden with the default package. I've Googled for this problem, but I couldn't find software strategies to manage a mix of ports and packages. Thanks in advance for the great show."
Yep, there is a solution for that. First of all, to use package.ng on FreeBSD, since there isn't a technically official repository yet, although we expect there to be one in short order, but PCBSD has one that you can use, and it's just a matter of putting the URL in a config file, just like any other repo in any Linux distribution. But anyway, so there's a subcommand of package called hold. So you install Bacula from ports, and you do package hold Bacula, and then it won't overwrite it when you do a package update. And then you just have to manually update your Bacula from ports again when you want the newer version.
Very good.
There's also another command, package annotate, that allows you to write a note about why it's held. So when some other administrator sits down at the machine and they go to do it, they'll be like, I see, this package is custom built with these options, right? You want to note which options you custom compiled it with. So when they go to update it, they know which options to use in the new version as well. Right? Because if they just, custom compile it, but have the defaults, they don't check MySQL, then you're going to end up with the same thing as if they had used the package version.
Right. Yeah. I like it. I think package.ng looks promising. Okay.
It is very nice.
Well, if you'd like to get your email on the...
And then there's one other story I wanted to mention.
Go ahead.
Added it kind of late.
Yeah,
but VBSDCon, the VeriSign BSD conference, is at the end of October 25th through 27th. Registration is now open. It's only $75 if you want to come to the conference.
Are you going?
Yes, I will be there.
Man, you're going to all these things. You're crazy.
Yeah.
That's going to be awesome, Alan. And where is it at again?
It's in Virginia.
Virginia.
In Dulles, Virginia.
Oh, man. I feel like if you're going to the heart of America, I should go with you.
Well, it's the East Coast.
Yeah, I know, but that's
So, previously I went to Meet BSD, which is in California, so this time on the East Coast, but in the States. So, yes, if you're around... Dulles, Virginia, or the Washington, D.C. area, then you should definitely come out.
That's a historic landmark. I gotta go. I gotta go with you. I just can't let you go there. And you don't even have to change time zones this time.
Yep.
That's nice.
My flight there is like 90 minutes.
Wow.
Some of the talks that will be there are migration from GCC to Clang, automating deployment of FreeBSD and PCBSD using PC sysinstall by Chris Moore, FreeBSD with Netflix, comprehensive look at BSD config, a new tool from Devin Teskey. Birds of a Feather session. They haven't picked what the sessions will be, but I've recommended ZFS, Beehive, and a bunch of other stuff.
Oh, I see a couple on Sunday. I like.
In a Birds of a Feather session, it would just be a bunch of people that want to talk about something, just talking about it.
Yeah.
Then there would be more general session stuff.
One on package.ng on Sunday, and one on FreeNAS plugins too.
Yep, they also have the evolution of NetMap framework, which is a way to handle like 10 gigabits per second of packets while still doing inspection and NAT and things like that on them. Also, they will have lightning talks. These are a really cool way to learn about a bunch of different things really quickly. So it's like a 1 hour session, and so the way they normally do it is they'll have about 10 different speakers sitting at little tables, and break up the group of the 200 people that are there or whatever into 10 groups or something like that. And then you'll go and talk to each speaker for 5 or 10 minutes. And so they'll give you a quick rundown of what they're building or whatever, or what information they're disseminating. So what you would normally have gotten from an hour-long talk, the synopsis version of that, and then you can ask questions about it. And so basically, it's like getting to go to 10 different talks in 1 hour.
That's a great idea.
To find out about all the different things that are happening at once without having to sit there for 10 hours.
I like that they're providing breakfast and lunch, too.
Yep.
That's nice.
Yes, and like you said, there's a talk on package.ng. There's also one on inspecting packets with OpenBSD and PF. And then everything you ever wanted to know about building your own FreeNAS plugins. So it's definitely going to be a good conference, and that's October 25th through 27th.
And Alan will be there, so if you want to meet Alan in person...
That's the way to do it. I'll also be at EuroBSDCon, which is September something or other.
Man, we got one of these days. You got to do one of these tech snaps from a con. That'd be so cool. Like,
EuroBSDCon is the 26th through 29th of September.
Okay.
The problem from doing it from a con is I'm kind of busy during the whole con.
And the bandwidth is horrible, and the audio is atrocious. Not always, right? Not always, yeah.
Right. Like I bought one of those snowball mics to take with me to these conferences to have decent audio and stuff.
Wow.
But really, the biggest problem is the fact that
you're running around doing stuff.
Seeing the schedule, I'm busy learning stuff the whole time.
Wait a minute. You mean you want to go to the conference and actually enjoy and attend the conference? Hold on a second here. Yeah, this is the problem I have with Linux Fest, is that when I go to Linux Fest, I'm in such work mode that I don't really get to go around and talk with people and line up interviews or really do anything like that because I'm, doing all kinds of other crazy stuff.
Yeah, so I want to go there and hear all the talks because there's so many that are, I want to learn all that stuff.
Yeah.
And it's really, the nice thing about MeetBSD and VBSDCon is they have this unconference format where it's not all just a room full of people listening to one guy talk.
Yeah.
It's a lot more, you get to meet a lot more people, you get to talk to a lot more people, because you're getting broken up into like groups of 5 people for the lightning talks, you get to know the 5 people that you travel around with and what they're interested in and what they do. And that definitely helps.
Yeah. Oh, and it's great for conferences about this size too. It really works very well.
Yeah. And same with the birds of a feather thing is you get to help pick what the topics are going to be, and so you end up in a group of people that want to talk about the same thing you want to talk about.
Well, and what's cool, and I guess this is true if you go to WWDC or you go to Google I/O, but what's different about these types of conferences where it's Linux and BSD, and you also have people there that are working on all the associated projects that work on those platforms, and you can actually I've talked to the guy that created MySQL. I've had a conversation with the creator of MySQL. It's like that happened. You can talk to the actual people writing code at these things, which is really awesome.
Part of these conferences is actually deciding what to do next or how to do the next thing.
Yeah.
You can
maybe have a little input.
Suggest, right, exactly.
Nudge.
At MeetBSD last year, I got to talk one-on-one with the 2 developers of Beehive, the main guys that were behind it. It's expanded a bit since then, but I was like, it'd be really cool if you could do this, this, and this. And they're like, we see value in all those things too. And then they're higher on the list than they were before now because you want them. And knowing that somebody wants them makes it much easier to justify spending the time to write them.
Yeah, it's a really level.
Rather than writing the feature and hoping somebody will use it, when you have this list of people that want this feature and will use it if you make it, it makes it much easier to invest the time to build it.
It's a very unique level of access.
Yes. Or, if you want some new feature in PF, the firewall, you can talk to the 2 guys who write most of the code.
Right. Yeah. All right. If you'd like to get your email into the show, email us, techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com. Hit that contact link and choose TechSNAP. And now it supports a subject line and image attachment. That's right. Fancy features getting rolled out to that contact form all the time. Also, you can start a thread in our subreddit, links.techsnap.tv, and just put a provocative title in there to catch our eye, and then probably make it onto the show. All right, Alan, with the feedback all done, that means it's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. Welcome to the TechSNAP Roundup. Yeah, that's what that crazy music means. Now, the Roundup stories didn't quite fit at the top of the show, but we still want to give you some links to check out on your own after the show. Maybe kick them around a little bit. A lot of these links came from our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. And Mr. Jude, I believe the first Roundup story this week is mine, and it's an NSA story. Surprise, surprise. This one comes from Bruce Schneier. He wrote a piece for The Atlantic, and it was very poignant. And I'll just read you a couple highlights that I liked. He starts very strong. He says, it turns out the NSA domestic and worldwide surveillance apparatus is even more extensive than we thought. Bluntly, the government has commandeered the Internet. Most of the largest Internet companies provide information to the NSA, betraying their users. Some, as we've learned, fight and lose. Others cooperate, either out of patriotism or because they believe it's easier that way. A great piece he goes on to say, the Google, Microsoft, Yahoo, and others are pleading with the government to allow them to explain detailed information they provided in response to national security letters and other government demands. They've lost the trust of their customers, and explaining what they do and don't do is how to get it back. but the government refuses. They don't care. And then one other point that he mentioned in the article, but I recommend you read the whole damn thing. He says, these companies can fight. You, an executive in one of those companies, can fight. You'll probably lose, but you need to take a stand. You might win. It's time we called the government's actions what they really are. Commandeering. Commandeering is a practice we've used during wartime, when commercial ships are taken for military use or production lines are converted to military production. But now it's happening in peacetime. Vast swaths of the internet are being commandeered to support the surveillance state. Commandeering is a good way to put it, because you're going in, you're installing equipment, you're taking this information, and you're telling them there's nothing you can do about it, and we don't even care if it damages your business model, a la LavaBit, right?
The only company we know that's fought back so far is Yahoo.
Yahoo. Or now LavaBit, where they had to shut down. And it's interesting. Right. So one of the things, I don't know if you caught it while you're traveling, but Secure Circle also shut down their messaging service. Here's a couple of interesting. Secure Circle offered private chat and private email, kind of like essentially what LavaBit did. And when LavaBit shut down, Secure Circle, their first thing was they powered off the server, took it out of the rack, physically destroyed the server, and then announced they were shutting down mail services, because they were tipped off by somebody that if you announce you're going to discontinue mail services because you don't want to be drawn into this NSA surveillance thing, if you announce your intention to shut down your communication system, that is all of the window of opportunity and justification the government needs to fast-track a security letter and prevent you from shutting it down. So Secure Circle said, in order to prevent that, we couldn't even warn our users we were going to do it. We just had to destroy the server. So I'm totally in line with what Schneider's saying.
If they get the security letter and then destroy it afterwards, that's contempt of court.
Right. They had to do it before they were even asked. So Schneider's got a great piece. He's been on fire lately. He was on the first 30 minutes of This Week in Google this week too, talking about that interview. Cool. Now this story made some headlines, and the next one, the roundup is yours, Alan. Secure Random.
Yes. The Android Java API Secure Random method does not actually generate secure random numbers or keys. It seems it actually fails to properly initialize the pseudo-random number generator.
Yeah, it's horrible.
So if you don't implement it correctly, which, having standard cryptographic libraries is great, but if you don't use them properly, then they don't work properly. So anyway, because of it seems to be partially a problem with the way it was implemented and partially a problem with just the way Android was set up. But it means that cryptographic keys that were generated using the API are not actually as secure as they should be. They basically predictably random, which is not cryptographically random.
Yeah, that's no good.
And this actually led to the theft of bitcoins.
Yeah, 55 of them.
Yes, which is like $5,700 worth of bitcoins.
Now, it should be noted, they were stolen actually with the owner's permission as an experiment.
Right. But basically, they're able to get his information by...
Right, because the wallet's address was generated by this insecure library. So they were able to predict
the seed value that was used was like the transaction number, and under the assumption that it would never be reused, and it can easily be reused.
Well, I guess somebody was testing it, and if you don't do it just right, it'll actually, in some cases, two different machines will produce the same exact number.
Right, because when you don't initialize the pseudo-random number generator, it initializes with a value of 0, and that's predictable.
Yeah.
If you ever wrote code in QBasic, and you remember you had to initialize the random number generator, and if you didn't, then it would generate the same set of random numbers every time.
This, though, seems like the thing that operating systems figured out a long time ago.
Well, it is part of it, I think, is just people not...
Or dev random. Hell.
Right. Basically, people weren't using dev-random to seed the cryptographic number generator.
They will now. In fact, blockchain.info released an update, and that's what they just switched to using was dev-random. Now, is this another vulnerability in Android that the older devices aren't going to get a patch for? Is this yet... should we just have a master list?
There's not even a patch for the newer devices.
Right, I know, but I'm assuming there will be.
Fixed, but I'm guessing... the blog post I linked to actually has some code that you can put in your app to work around the problem.
Okay, good.
It basically extends the Google Java Secure Random API to make it actually initialize the random number generator correctly so that is something that can be fixed in the apps instead of the operating system that way.
Very good. Okay, so as long as people update their apps.
Yep.
If you have a if you have a Bitcoin wallet, first of all, go listen to Plan B. We covered it, and we told you how to fix it. It's not just a matter of updating the apps. You also then need to generate a new address. Yeah.
Yeah, you have to regenerate all your cryptographic keys, otherwise you're using the weak key still.
Yep. So we covered that in Plan B this week on Tuesday, if you guys want to go check it out.
It's actually quite reminiscent of the Debian bug, where they had that. Remember, there was only like 32,000 possible states?
Yep.
Well, in this case, there's one state.
Yeah.
So it's even worse, but it's the same concept.
Is this next story really in the Roundup?
Yep.
A healthcare story?
Well, it's because it's actually about computers.
Oh, okay. All right. Tell me what's going on.
So the implementation of President Obama's new Healthcare Act is actually being delayed because the insurance industry's software that tracks all this stuff, basically the law says that someone's out-of-pocket expenses for a medical emergency or whatever cannot exceed like $12,500.
For a family, yeah.
Yeah, and that's, if someone gets cancer or whatever, their out-of-pocket expenses could be over $100,000.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And so the insurance industry has managed to get that part of the law delayed because they say that their computer software cannot actually calculate and sum up a patient's out-of-pocket expenses. They can't tell which expenses are out-of-pocket and which ones would be automatically covered and things like that.
We're on OpenOffice, and we need to upgrade to LibreOffice before that macro works.
Yeah, basically, it seems like they don't have tags on the different costs to categorize them. It seems like it should be fairly simple to solve.
Yeah.
But again, they're like, the best part is, we need like 2 years to fix this.
Wow.
But the New York Times has the whole story, and it's pretty funny. They're like, our computers can't add.
Yeah. Yeah, historically, computers are super bad at math. If there's one thing computers are not good at, is math. They're real bad at it, Alan.
Yeah.
All right, next story in the Roundup. Another Alan story, the factoring cryptopocalypse.
Yes. So this was a story from DEF CON. They presented this paper called the Factoring Cryptopocalypse, and my favorite security researcher, Colin Percival, has a blog up explaining why he's not afraid of this research and why he still uses RSA and he doesn't expect it to be a problem.
Okay. I mean, we've kind of been conjecturing.
The research here is limited to solving discrete logarithms for problems over a field of small characteristic. I didn't study math at university. I don't know what that means. But
so you're bad like a computer is at math.
So as interesting as, to quote Colin, as interesting as the work is mathematically, it should not be a great surprise to cryptographers. We've known for over a decade that small characteristic fields are scary. But basically he says, this work is akin to seeing a buffer overflow discovered in SendMail in 2003. Interesting in the security community, but not a great surprise to anyone who's paying attention.
Right. Yeah.
So when should we worry? When there's any hint that this work is extended to cover prime fields, right? So if a discrete logarithm problem over a prime field is very close to integer factorization, which is the hard part of math that all cryptography is based on, right? Is that if you multiply these two big prime numbers together, somebody won't be able to figure out what those two numbers were. That requires integer factorization. But if people can do discrete logarithms over a prime field, then they might be able to figure that out. It says a lot of people are starting to switch towards using elliptic curve encryption or cryptography. He says the problem is because elliptic curve is more complicated than RSA, it's easier to make an implementation error or introduce a side channel that could leak information and make it easier to crack. But if you do use elliptic curve, make sure you do it over a prime field and not a binary field.
Very good.
Right, because if you have that small characteristic, then it becomes vulnerable to this new research. But anyway, at the end, he summarizes with, for my own purposes, I'm going to keep just using 2048-bit RSA keys. Yeah. And he also has a link to an earlier article he wrote called The Cryptographic Right Answers. And it talks about if you're going to implement cryptography, look at these things that explain how you should do it.
Oh, That's a definitely a good read for developers.
Yes, yeah, especially if you're, if you were writing something like CryptoCat, if you had read this, you probably wouldn't have screwed up so many
That's
times.
what I was just thinking. I'm glad you said it. All right. Well, this next story caught my attention because the way I actually first came onto it was I saw a flurry of new research published, and it was coming from folks out of IBM in one of their Israel divisions. And I thought, and it was specifically related to cyber attacks. Oh, IBM's got their name attached to a paper on cybersecurity. Well, this week, IBM announced that they are purchasing an Israel cybersecurity specialist. Trusteer is the company's name. IBM today announced acquisition of Trusteer, a specialist in cybersecurity primarily focused on financial services. People are guesstimating that the purchase is a range between $800 million and $1 billion for this firm. What's interesting about it is the firm themselves had only managed to raise $10.1 million. So if IBM had actually bought them for $1 billion, that's a hell of a return and shows you how hot the cybersecurity market is, too. And it's interesting that IBM's getting in there.
Trusteer might have only raised that much, but I'm sure they're making more than that because...
It's, big business.
At least 2, and maybe even all 3 of the 3 banks I use Trusteer's software for the online banking.
Yeah, and IBM's a brand in banking. I mean, it's a good fit for them.
Yeah, so basically they're going to bundle Trusteer kind of thing. But yes, Trusteer I've noticed the label starting to pop up on all my online banking over the last couple of years.
Oh. Well, Alan, you might get frustrated one of these days if you had a rights holder error. That's what RadioTimes.com had happen. They were blocked by UK ISPs due to a rights holder error. And that just sounds like one of those things where you get something tagged because...
So basically, this EU law has gone through where the courts can force ISPs to block pirate sites. Mm-hmm. What happens when the pirated site happens to share an IP address with the legitimate site, like the RadioTimes.com, which is basically an online TV calendar? Okay. So they accidentally blocked this Radio Times because they blocked the IP address that was also used by some other site that the Football League, the Scottish Premier League, was trying to get blocked. So basically, they didn't check that only the offending site was using that IP address and got the whole IP address blocked. And in response to this, another site that got blocked was EasyTV, which is a TV torrent site.
Yeah, I love EasyTV. EasyTV.it.
Yeah, EZTV. Anyway, is blocked in the UK. So what they did was change their GeoDNS, right? They basically point to a different IP for depending where you're coming from. They pointed all the GeoDNS for the UK to go to Torrent Freak, basically so that people would get a page explaining why it wasn't loading instead of getting an error, right?
Clever.
Except because of the way the filtering works, that caused Torrent Freak to be considered to be EasyTV and blocked.
So they're breaking the internet.
Yeah, so basically what they did was they do a DNS query on EasyTV, find out what the IP address is, and block it. So next thing EasyTV did was, let's point our DNS records at Facebook.
Oh, that is so funny. Did it work?
Yep. Apparently it worked at one of the ISPs.
Good.
They're not sure. Basically, Facebook was unreachable from one ISP, but they're not sure if it was a Facebook issue or because of this filtering.
This is what everyone needs to do from now on, is, what, throw it in their dumb faces, because they're obviously too stupid to even manage the system when they're doing this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
They shouldn't be running it.
Exactly.
So really, honestly, how about everyone, let's just take a little internet pact. Let's do the whole world a favor when they do this kind of crap. Do exactly that. Point it to legitimate services where these big companies will get pissed off and apply pressure on the government to fix this broken system.
Yeah, or to just not do it.
Oh, man, that
I
makes me
saw
so
an
upset.
article the other day about a British ISP who says if you call up and get service from us, you're automatically opting out of the porn filter because we're not going to run the porn filter.
Good.
So if you sign up with us, then you're going to be opted out of the porn filter.
It makes me so frustrated, Alan. It makes me so frustrated.
But again, this piracy filter is separate from that, and I don't think they'll be able to opt out of that. And
yeah. Hopefully there'll be other solutions for that. All right, next story in the roundup: the jamming wars are just beginning. I totally buy it too. Alan, you mentioned you threw this in the roundup for my benefit. And I can kind of see it, as more public spaces get surveillance gear and facial detection, maybe we'll all start wearing hats brimmed with infrared LEDs and things like that.
Yep. Or, we were talking about, they were doing some GPS test in, I think it was New Jersey or New York, and they were like, our GPS is being jammed. What's going on here? Turns out it was a truck that was making a delivery and had a GPS jammer so that the guy's boss wouldn't know where the truck was. And those are now, GPS jamming is legal in the States. So it comes down to this, if we come up with ways to jam surveillance, like you said, a hat with infrared LEDs on it that would blind a camera, if they go and make that illegal, then, it's going to be this race between the technology and the law. And the point of the article is that as well as, encrypting all your stuff it's this arms race with the government.
Oh, yeah.
What we need to do is start applying the political pressure to make them just stop mass surveilling us instead.
Right. And they'll just keep spending money,
Yep.
All right. Well, we saved the biggest story in the entire episode for the last story in the Roundup. And that is, ladies and gentlemen, prepare yourself, brace yourselves. I hope you're sitting because PuTTY 0.6.3 has been released.
0.6.3. There's no.
Oh, okay. All right.
Only one dot.
Only one dot.
Oh, yes. So PuTTY, the SSH client, has released version 0.63 that fixes 4 critical security vulnerabilities, including ones that could leave the decrypted version of your SSH key in memory where a piece of malware could steal it.
You live in PuTTY.
Yes.
So
I have like 65 of them open at once.
Have you deployed the new executable, Alan?
Yes, I have, which was quite a pain because I had to log out of 65 sessions and then start them all up again.
I would honestly probably wait till I just rebooted my machine if I were you, because I know how many you have open.
Well, I started by renaming the old exe and installing the new one, and then starting all my new sessions with the new one, and
Good
then
call.
slowly phasing out the old ones.
This is a man dedicated to his uptime.
Well, I didn't want to reboot and stuff because this happens like just as I'm about to leave for vacation.
Of course.
And I need my machine to be up and running so that I can
Remote in if you need to.
connect into it if I have to.
Yep.
And yeah.
I know exactly what you mean. Hey,
My Windows
look,
machine has been up for 5 weeks now.
this
I think the last reboot was to install the replacement network card after the lightning strike.
check out the machine that I'm running on. A lot of my machines are getting to this point now. This machine that I'm sitting at right now, 125 days of uptime in the studio.
Nice.
And that's and I'm in the same situation where I've got a terminal open with 4 or 5 tabs. You know, not as many connections as you've got, but 4 or 5 tabs of SSH sessions. And I am so used to always having them there that I muscle memory alt tab start typing. And when I get logged out, when I do get disconnected, it's like, what? What's happened? So yeah. Good work for the
my best server is currently at 979 days and 19 hours.
Damn, son.
Gonna hit 1024 and then upgrade it.
Are you really? Are you waiting for 1024 and then?
I have much other stuff to do anyway.
That's true.
So
it's not like you're hurting for work.
30 other machines that could use some love first. So.
Well, you know what needs some love?
So it's the newest version of PuTTY since 2011.
Yeah.
Not something you have to update every week.
No. Like CentOS.
Gotta love feature complete programs.
Yeah.
It's like, yes. Like the last change was only to sort of problem with Windows 7 and the way it does the... So when you right click, the menu actually has useful stuff.
It's just the right amount of updates for an app like that.
Yep.
Just right. So speaking of love, give our inbox some love. Email us techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com or submit links to our subreddit. They might end up being big news stories or at least make it into the roundup, and that always helps make a better show. So we appreciate the participation there. Now, if you really want to participate, you really want to interact live, or if you want to interact with us directly, join us live over jblive.tv. You can be like Derwiz in there. Eric from Directory Wizards Unity Sync, he's watching live today. Hi to Eric's mom. Hi there. And also, we encourage everyone else to join us live over jblive.tv, 1 p.m. Pacific, which is...
4 p.m. Eastern, 2000 UTC.
Kapow! This week, the audio stream's down, but we should have our audio stream back up next week, so you can always catch that at jblive.info. We've got high bitrate streams and low bitrate streams for you commuters. We've also got torrent feeds linked in our show notes. If you want to help defer our bandwidth costs, you can go subscribe to the torrent RSS feed, pop that into your favorite torrent manager, and then when a new TechSNAP comes out, that's one of the fastest ways to get it, because that's one of the first places that gets the feed update, and then you can help seed it out to the world. And we always appreciate that. All right, Alan, anything else you want to cover before we get out of here?
Nope, that's about it.
All right, man. Well, have a great week, and welcome back. I'm looking forward to more Star Trek convention pictures. I'm looking forward to that.
Yes, we should have more for next week.
All right, very good. Good. All right, good. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for tuning in this week's episode of TechSNAP. We'll see you right back here next week.